All right, it's time to get going here on the Panther-Lair Show. I lost my train of thought for a second. Just want to make sure the audio was actually on. Make sure I was not, talking dead air as we've done for the past couple weeks. Make that mistake. But it looks like everything's working right as we get started here on a Tuesday night on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's the Panther-Lair Show, our weekly podcast that we do here every week. And, we've been spending, I should have counted. I should have checked how many weeks it's been since the middle of March. I mean, we got to be coming up on 6 months, right? So 23, 24 weeks or so that we've been doing this podcast. Had a week or two off here or there for some vacations that I took, some trips. But let's say 20 plus weeks of this podcast that we've been doing every Tuesday night. We've been getting together at 8:30 p.m. on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com and doing the live stream and then releasing the podcast through the week. And we've been doing it for 20 plus weeks. 20 plus weeks of the Panthers Insider Show, of the Panther-Lair Show podcast, of the 321 column on Panther-Lair.com. 23, 24 weeks of content on Panther-Lair.com, writing about things, finding things to write about, finding stories to tell, finding angles and analysis and anything else we can come up with to talk about on the podcast, to talk about on the radio show, to write about on the website, all trying to fill time to get to this moment right here. Well, not this moment right here. Not Tuesday night at 8:30, Saturday at noon. No, Saturday at 4 p.m. This is how close we are, folks. 4 days away. Less than 4 days, right? I mean, 3 days and 20 hours. 3 days and less than 20 hours away from the season opener of the 2020 football season. A moment that I didn't think we would get to. I never thought we would get to get inside of 4 days away from the season opener. I never thought we'd get inside a week. I thought before we even got inside a month, things might be canceled. But here we are. And I got to say, as someone who pretty consistently predicted and expected the 2020 football season to be canceled, which I think would probably put me in the camp, according to some, of the people who wanted college football to be canceled, I have to say, it's pretty damn sweet that we're going to watch some college football on Saturday. And it's going to be different, and it's going to be weird. You guys aren't going to be at the game. Fans aren't going to be at the game. Media is going to be there, a small group of media, and we're going to be pretty limited in our activities as far as what we can do and where we can go. We can't go to the sidelines, can't go down on the field. There isn't going to be any of that. I mean, we can't even send our photographers down on the field. It's going to be, I don't think they're going to have sideline reporters on the field. I mean, it's going to be like one photographer who takes pictures for everybody and then Pitt taking pictures for everybody. And that's it. Plus your TV cameras. And outside of team personnel, that's all that's going to be down there. I'm guessing that, some Pitt personnel will be able to go down to the sidelines. But, I mean, it's going to be a completely different experience from anything we've seen or experienced or dealt with in, my 15 years of covering the team, obviously, because this whole situation, the last 6 months have been completely different from anything I've seen over the course of 15 years covering Pitt football and Pitt basketball and Pitt recruiting. But we're at a point now, I would have to think, and I would have to think you'd agree with me on this, that we're at a point where fans or no fans, weird or no weird, whatever it's going to be, at least it's football. And at least it's getting played, and at least we're going to get to watch. And like I say, I mean, those of us who cover the team will watch the game in person. You'll watch the game at home on the ACC network if you get it. And if you don't, because there's still the problem with Comcast going on. If you want to go get YouTube or YouTube TV or Hulu or whatever you choose to do, you can go get one of those services and watch the game because, guys, there's a game. There's a game actually happening. And my excitement about this is slowly building, just about having the sport of football back. And I caught some of the games that have been on over the last weekend or week or two. Watched a little bit here, having some games where there's some genuine interest. For me professionally, the Pitt game, And then, I mean, I'll be honest, I like playing fantasy football. I'm really looking forward to Thursday night. I might start Brandon Cooks just because I want to have a rooting interest in the game, even though I don't think Brandon Cooks is my best flex option. I want to have a rooting interest in this game with the Chiefs and the Texans on Thursday night. But I'm excited to have these things back. I'm excited that we made it to this point, and I feel like we worked really hard to get to this point. And this isn't me talking about us producing content on Panther-Lair.com. I mean, we all worked very hard to get to this point. And I think for a lot of us, and you would probably, I imagine you would agree, there were a lot of dark moments over the last 6 months. You know, there were a lot of times where I said, and probably you said, this isn't going to happen. They're not playing football in the 2020 calendar year. It's over. And we'll see what 2021 brings. And we talked about so many different things, spring seasons and truncated seasons, which they are playing some version of that, although they're playing 11 games, which is not 12, but it's still more than like 6 or 8, which was talked about. All these different, possibilities that we considered. And we ended up with what I think is probably, out of all the options that were considered along the way, all the different scenarios that were talked about along the way of how football could possibly happen in 2020, I got to say, I think we ended up with a pretty good one. I think, getting 10 conference games is a pretty fun twist on a season. If you're going to have a weird year, if you're going to have a bizarro season, you might as well, amp up the competition a little bit and make it exciting. And playing 10 conference games, it's exciting. It's fun. And I've broken down this schedule. I've talked a lot about what I expect or what I think. And I was just did some radio tonight, did a radio interview, and, was asked, what is this team going to do? What does this team need to do? And, there's always that question. There's always a few questions you ask before a season starts. One is, what do you hope they do? There's another is, what do you expect them to do? And then the one that I always think is interesting is, what do they need to do for the season to be considered a success? What do they need to accomplish? And obviously there's a lot of context that goes with that. I always point back to the 2018 season where they won the Coastal Division. That in and of itself, put in a vacuum, is an accomplishment. It's a success. You win the Coastal Division, you get to the ACC championship game, you have succeeded. And if that's the only thing we look at about the 2018 season, we would say that was a successful season. But we know that there's more context than that. We know that one of the 2 losses they had in the ACC was against was against North Carolina, who's awful. It was a bad loss. We know that they lost 51-6 to Penn State. We know that they went down to Central Florida and got blown out. We know that they blew it against a terrible Stanford team. It was playing with a bunch of guys sitting out. We know that context. Right, and that context, not to mention the fact that they finished 7-7, you add that context, and now it's a bit harder to define what constitutes a success. So, you could sit down and look at this season and say, well, if they go 11-0 and get to the ACC championship game and beat Clemson and advance to the college football playoffs, then that would be a success. Well, yes. And on the opposite side, you could say if they go 0-11, that would be a failure. Well, yes. There's a lot of wiggle room in between there, though. I've broken down this schedule a lot of times. I've talked a lot about what I see in this schedule, what I think constitutes a success, what I think Pitt needs to do on this schedule. And I really broke if you haven't heard those podcasts before or read it when I've written it, I broke the games really down into 3 groups. Once you get past the FCS game, get past Austin Peay, you have the 10 conference games. And I think it really breaks into 3 groups. And you've got the group of games that you should win. And it's Syracuse, NC State, Georgia Tech, Boston College. And chances are, I think for a lot of Pitt fans, the first thing that comes to mind is, look, they couldn't beat Boston College last year at home. This year's game is on the road. You really believe they're going to go up there and win? And yes, I do, because they should have won the game at home last year. That was a genuinely bad loss for Pat Narduzzi in this Pitt football program. And Narduzzi hasn't had a lot of truly bad losses, but that was one of them. I think they'll get that back this year, going on the road up to Boston College. And if they lose one of those 4 games, Syracuse, NC State, Georgia Tech, Boston College, then they're bigger problems. We're not going to be worried about what they need to do to get from 7 wins to 8 wins or 8 wins to 9 wins. All right, that's going to be off the table if they lose one of those games, because then you start dealing in more dire, conversations. Well, so you've got those 4 games on the one end that they should win. Pretty much going away. They should win those games. They should be the favorite in every one of them, and they should cover the spread in every single one of them. And then on the opposite side of the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got those challenging games. You got those 2 really difficult games, at Clemson and at home against Notre Dame. And those are games where they're not going to be favored. They're going to be the underdog. They're probably not going to win. You're not going to be expected to win those games. And if you do win, it will be an upset. Now, we don't rule out the possibility of winning those games because we saw what happened the last time Pitt went to Clemson. And we've seen what happened pretty much any time Pitt plays Notre Dame. It's pretty competitive. They give Notre Dame a real game. I mean, I can't think of the last Notre Dame game that was really not competitive and not close. I mean, what was the final score in 2003? I mean, I know Notre Dame won that kind of going away because they ran the ball like crazy. Final was 20-14. I guess 2005. 2005 would be the game, the last time it was really a blowout in either direction for those 2 teams when Pitt and Notre Dame have faced each other. 2015 to some extent, that one ended up being a 42-30. I mean, Notre Dame was kind of in control of that game all along, but I mean, Pitt battled, and they're going to give Notre Dame a game. But I don't think you go into it circling that as, boy, that's one of the wins they're going to have. If they win that game, it's going to be an upset. So you've got those 2 groups on the extremes. You've got the 4 games they should win, the 2 games they probably won't win. And then you've got the middle. And I've talked about this before, and I'm going to keep talking about it because I think this is the important stretch. And it's not, these 4 games aren't all together. Some of them are, some of them aren't. Some of them are spread out a little bit. But it's really the key segment of games, the key section of games that's going to decide what Pitt's season is. And it's Virginia Tech, and it's Louisville, and it's those 2 road trips to Florida State and Miami. And all 4 of those games, Pitt, depending on how the season is going, Pitt might be favored, Pitt might be the underdog. I don't think any one of those 4 programs is so far above Pitt or so far below Pitt that you rule out any real possibility, of, they should definitely win, or, they should definitely lose. And maybe by the time we get to those games, Virginia Tech will look like crap, or Florida State and Miami will be complete disasters, or they'll be great. Maybe they'll be really good. Louisville's relatively early in the season. I don't know if we'll have a firm grasp on who they are at that point when Pitt hosts them at Heinz Field. But those other games, you'll know who Virginia Tech is, and so maybe we'll go into that game with a different perspective. But as we sit here right now, it looks like every other Pitt-Virginia Tech game and say, boy, I just don't know. And every now and then you get surprised, like last year's game or the year before, which are sort of the 2 rare blowouts that we've seen in this Pitt-Virginia Tech series basically for the last 20 years. More often than not, you get these close games that really could go either way. And I don't see any reason to expect anything different this year. If Pitt wants to really have a season that is successful, they have to make that game go their way. They have to make the Louisville game go their way. And they have to go on the road to Florida State, and they have to go on the road to Miami, and they have to win those games. They have to find a way to do it. Now, that's a challenge. That's a tough task, saying you need to sweep those 4 teams. It's not easy. 3-1 is probably a good record in those 4 games. Honestly. I mean, because I think those will be, I think Louisville and Virginia Tech will be pretty good teams. I think Florida State and Miami, it's tough to tell. It's tough to tell what Miami's quarterback is going to be. It's tough to tell what Mike Norvell is going to do in his first year at Florida State. But I think both of those teams are going to have enough athletes, and they're going to be home games for those teams, that it's going to be a challenge for Pitt. I think in most years you would say 3-1 against a stretch like that is pretty good. But this isn't most years. And this isn't most Pitt teams. This is a good team. This is a team with a very talented defense. This is a team with a 3rd-year starter at quarterback. This is a team with a bunch of guys on the offensive line who have experience. This is a team with some talented skill players. This is a team with enough pieces in place, enough consistency on the coaching staff. Head coach in his 6th year, both coordinators returning, first time in Pat Narduzzi's tenure. You got to sweep those 4 games. And I think at this point, you can put those expectations on Pitt under Pat Narduzzi. Because as much as we will sit back and talk about how this is a weird year and nobody's going to get fired over this season, and there's a built-in automatic excuse for any coach this year because of the sort of extreme circumstances surrounding the whole calendar year of 2020, let alone the football season of 2020. And we can talk about that, and we will talk about that, and we'll say it a lot throughout the course of the fall. We'll use that as an excuse for any coach. But, to borrow a phrase from Mike Tomlin, the rubber has to meet the road at some point. At some point, you need to put up. You're 6 years in. You have to go out and have a year where you sweep those 4 teams that are more or less on the same level as you. And I mean, I'm not ruling out, an upset of Notre Dame or an upset of Clemson. I mean, those things can happen. And if they do, then you're looking at the chance of a special season. But I mean, this team, if they're as good as I think they are, and I don't think they're a top 5 team or maybe even a top 10 team, but if they're as good as I think they are, and I think they have some real talent, then they need to sweep those 4 games. They need to go 8-2 in the ACC at a minimum, which would put them, you add in the Austin Peay game, it would put them at 9-2 on the regular season. And I think that's where they need to be. I think you have to reach a point where you don't just split the toss-up games. You have to have that season every now and then where you take all the toss-up games. And the only losses you get are from the teams that are clearly superior to you. Clemson has superior talent. Notre Dame has superior talent. None of those other teams has superior talent by such a wide margin that you say, well, Pitt doesn't win. Yeah, you understand. They were just, they were beat. No more games like Miami last year. No more games like Boston College last year. No more games like Virginia last year. Okay, because, Virginia was probably a better team than Pitt, but Pitt gave that game away. They gave that game away. No more games like that. Not this year. Maybe next year you're rebuilding the defense, or maybe you're not because you have all those guys. Maybe all those guys come back since they have the extra year of eligibility. But I mean, I think there has to reach a point where you accomplish something. You achieve at a consistent level. You play at a consistent level. You don't have that kind of week-to-week inconsistency and slow starts and weak second halves and all these different things. No, you just go out and you play like a good team. It's time to see if Pitt has a good team, and by extension, a good coach and a good program. And we'll have that built-in excuse that this is a weird year. If things go haywire, and there are things that we can't predict. There are things that sitting here on September 8th we cannot predict. We don't know if there's going to be a breakout of COVID-19 on the Pitt football team, and it's going to cause a bunch of guys to miss the season or miss games, and that will affect things. You go down to Florida State and you don't have Jimmy Morrissey, you're going to have some trouble. You go down to Miami and you don't have Jimmy Morrissey, or you don't have Patrick Jones, or you don't have Carter Warren or Kenny Pickett or something, you're going to have some trouble. All things being as close to normal as they possibly can, this team needs to win eight conference games. That's what I think, at least. Let's go over to the comment section, see what people are thinking, talking about here. Started off with S-Max says Pitt's COVID testing seems strong. Yeah, I mean, look, we're never going to get anything concrete out of Pitt in terms of their testing numbers or their what they, what positives and test results. I think if guys miss games, I don't think they're even going to tell us that. If a guy sits out a game or sits out a game because he tested positive, or sits out 2 games because he came into contact with someone who tested positive, they're not going to tell us. I mean, I can't rule anything out, but I'd be shocked if they do. I'd be shocked if Pitt turns around and says, well, yeah, Jimmy Morrissey sat out this game because he tested positive, or Carter Warren sat out this game because he came into contact with somebody who tested positive, so he's going to be out for 2 weeks. That's not going to happen. But by all indications, they haven't had those problems yet. By all indications, they've been able to avoid any kind of real breakout on the team. We saw how quickly they sort of snapped into action when there was a scare a few weeks ago, and they do have UPMC on their side. And no matter what you want to say about UPMC being something of a monolith in the city, and there are a lot of things you could say about UPMC, but if you are in a situation like this, they're a pretty good partner to have. And I think Pitt is pretty happy to have UPMC, working with them as they try and move through this whole situation with testing and the virus. TRR says, saying ain't so that the offense will be vanilla on Saturday. That's something that really, I thought a lot about that this week. I asked Pat Narduzzi about it on Monday during his Monday press conference. I asked him and I was like, look, I know you're not going to give a straight answer on this, but has your approach to season openers, particularly against FCS opponents, has it changed over the time since you've been here? So, I mean, you go back to 2015, they opened against Youngstown State. They had to score 45 points in that game because Youngstown State scored 37. But 2016 was a classic example. They go 28-7 win over Villanova. The offense looks boring and uninspiring and not very exciting. They were obviously holding a lot back because they go out and, roll out all the shovel passes and formations and shifts and all those things. And blow Penn State away. I think keeping that stuff hidden was a big. I mean, it was valuable. I think they were able to get a jump and get an edge on Penn State in 2016 because they hid the offense they were planning to roll out. 2017, they have to go to overtime to beat Youngstown State, and that was not exactly a shining moment for the football program. And we all sat here, at least I sat here, and talked about how their offense is going to be much better. They're not. This isn't all their offense. They've got more to show. They're going to do more than this, and they kind of never really were any better than that. 2018, they beat Albany 33-7. I don't know if there was really much to say about that. That was just kind of a game. And then last year, of course, I mean, they didn't open with Delaware, but once they got to Delaware, they really kind of sat back because they were trying to let Kenny Pickett heal up after the UCF game. They had Nick Patty out there, and I think they were just happy to escape. So I asked Pat Narduzzi, I'm like, are you still inclined to hold back on the offense again this year? Are you going to try and open it up more? Has your philosophy changed? And, he didn't answer it, and I knew he wouldn't answer it. I didn't expect him to answer it, but I think the question has to be asked. And I think basically the sort of non-answer that he gave, if I was going to read into it, is effectively saying, we're not going to show everything we have in our offense. We're going to hope we can get by and get a win with the little bit we want to show. And if it gets into the second half and we're not in a position we want to be in, then we'll show more. We'll break some things out that we hoped we would get to keep hidden. I go back and forth on it. I think there's value in being able to surprise your first real opponent. But I don't know how much mileage you really get out of that. So they might get the jump on Syracuse, and Syracuse might not see this wrinkle coming or that new kind of play or formation coming. But once you do it against Syracuse, it's going to be on tape. And I mean, I know you build week to week and you do different things and you take advantage of what your opponents are seeing on film. But I mean, at some point, man, you just got to line up and play. You just got to outcoach the other guys. You got to outplay the other guys. You got to outperform and out-execute. And it doesn't matter if they know what you're doing or they don't know what you're doing or they think they know what you're doing. Go out and play. And I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world to go out and light up Austin Peay and drop 45 points on him. I think your fan base would love to see that because your fan base is kind of bored right now. Your fan base is a little bit, I don't want to say apathetic, but I think they're very much in wait and see mode with your football program and your football team right now. And you'll get plenty of opportunities to show them whatever it is exactly you can do. And it's not like you're trying to play for attendance because you're not going to get anybody at the games in September and probably all season would be my guess. But you can at least build some excitement in your fan base if you go out and do some exciting things, even against Austin Peay. Even if it means Syracuse knows that you like to do this with Jordan Addison or do that with Daniel Carter or whoever it is. Go out and score some points. Go out and have some fun. It's not going to cost you the game against Syracuse. But, that's coaches. That's what coaches seem to do. So, or at least what this coach likes to do. Dale Gribble says, if we don't start off 5-0, it's going to be a rough year. Well, let's look at that, Dale. Let's look at what the 5-0 would mean. That means opening against Austin Peay, they should win that. Opening and then Syracuse, they should win that. Louisville, like I said, is one of those toss-up games. Then NC State and at Boston College. So, yeah, Austin Peay, Syracuse, NC State, Boston College, I think they should win those 4. Louisville is going to be the first one of those real tests, those real toss-up games that, like I said, I think you should win. I think you should win all 4 of them. Louisville, Miami, Florida State, and Virginia Tech. I think at this point in 2020, year 6 for Pat Narduzzi, third-year starter at quarterback, all these guys back on defense, you should beat all 4 of those teams. And the first one they're going to get is September 26th, is Louisville. Now, I'm in agreement. I think they should go 5-0 to start. And then go down to Miami at 5-0, probably ranked, and maybe with something going. You know what I mean? Maybe with a little bit of success. Maybe you've got your offense rolling a little bit and your defense is playing well. And then you go down and you beat Miami maybe. And you come back to host Notre Dame on the 24th of October, 6-0, ranked top 20 at least, if not top 15. Gets real interesting, doesn't it? This season gets real interesting. But you have to take care of it. You have to beat Louisville. You know what I mean? You have to beat Miami. You have to beat these teams that I believe you are capable of beating, that are not so far above you talent-wise that you can't hang with them. You can hang with them. You gave up 16 points to Miami last year. If you hold an opponent to 16 points this year, you better freaking win. You know? You can't let those games get away. And so that's when we'll find out if this team really is something different than what we've seen in the past, or if it's another Pitt team that is going to have a few of those clunkers every year. I think they should be good enough this year to avoid those clunkers. But we'll find out, right? We'll find out. Let's see. Anthony Tennyson says, we have a 68,000-seat stadium. They should at least let 10,000 in and spread them out. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, and Ricky the Dragon Kayak chimes in and agrees 10 to 15,000 in that stadium is a no-brainer. I mean, yeah, you should be able to find the space for that amount of people. I think part of it is, I'm guessing, part of the concern is not how you're going to seat 10,000 people in the stadium. It's how you're going to get them into the stadium, how you're going to get them out of the stadium, and what they're going to do when they're not in their seats. 10,000 is a lot of people. So it can spread out throughout Heinz Field. There's no question about that. But it's a lot of people, and it's not just about where those people. It's not just about where those people are and what those people are doing during the game. It's where they are, where they're moving, and when they're interacting with other people and coming into contact with. Are they going to the concession stand? Are they going to the bathroom? Are they walking around in the concourse? I have a friend. He goes to every Pitt home game. He's a big fan. Him and his dad, they've got seats. They've got season tickets, and they stand up on the rotunda. That's where they like to stand, on the end zone, at the open end of the end zone. Kind of if you're, I don't know if you know where Bill Hillgrove and I guess this first game will be Jeff Hathorn, where that radio booth is. They stand kind of right near there on the rotunda. It's where they always stand. I go out and see them every game. They're out there. It's where they prefer to be. What if you have people who want to try and do that? I think that's where it runs into a problem that 10,000 people becomes difficult to manage. It's not about finding seats for them and spreading them out in their seats. It's about managing them once they're in the stadium, getting them into the stadium, getting them out, managing them once they're in the stadium to try and maintain social distancing. That's what I would imagine is the concern, but I don't know, man. I don't make the rules. Brock Madonic, 2 years ago today was the 51-6 game. What were your thoughts on that game? Yeah, that was 2 years ago, September 8th, 2018. I'm looking down at the media guide. Got it right there. And 51-6 lost to Penn State. My first thought is it was a miserable night. It was raining like crazy. And that was pretty unpleasant, the rain. My second thought is that game wasn't a 51-6 blowout the whole way through. It was a close game. I mean, it was one score at halftime, right? They were right in it. And if they hadn't, it would be even closer if they hadn't dropped the extra point when they tried to kick one after the touchdown. But it got out of hand in the second half when you had a bunch of special teams errors. You had really bad field position for Pitt's offense. I mean, it got out of control. Penn State didn't have to do a lot to win that game. Pitt gave them that game. And then it gets to like 51 because James Franklin pours it on at the end and scores another passing touchdown. But it was 2018 where we have that conflicting, those sort of conflicting reflections on the season where, 7-7 with a 51-6 loss and a 45-14 loss to a non-Power 5 opponent, a loss in a bowl game to a team that was playing without a bunch of its players, a loss to a North Carolina team that only won like 2 games all season. Those are all the markers of a bad team and a bad season. A 500 record is a bad season. But then that team also went on a 4-game winning streak to win the Coastal Division and get to the ACC championship game in Clemson. I'll always struggle with which side to come down on that season, that 2018 season, of whether it was a success or a disappointment, because there's really a little bit of both. I mean, I lean ever so slightly toward the success side, because I think, you look at that run they went on. They lose to Carolina. They go down and get blown out at Central Florida. They come back home, and they're playing Syracuse. Syracuse is ranked at the time. They take Syracuse to overtime and win that game, 44-37. Huge win. Then they go out to Notre Dame. They lose it 19-14, but they gave Notre Dame everything Notre Dame could handle. They took a top 5 team on the road down to the wire. And I think Pitt came home from that game with a whole lot more confidence than you would expect out of a loss. They came home from that game believing they could actually accomplish something. And I still remember, and I've told this story before, 2018 Notre Dame game. I'm driving back the day after the game, Sunday. I'm driving back from Indiana. It's not a terrible drive. It's a boring drive through Ohio, but and I'm driving back, and I'm on the phone with somebody who follows Pitt football really closely, and they're a super fan. They're actually professionally linked with Pitt, and we're talking, and I'm like, it doesn't look good right now. They were 3-4 at that point, but they were 1-1 in the ACC. I'm like, look at this stretch you have coming up. I mean, you played pretty well just now you played pretty well at Notre Dame against a pretty good Notre Dame team. And you got this stretch coming up of Duke, at Virginia, Virginia Tech, Wake Forest. You could go on a little run here. Like, it would not surprise me at all if you went on a little run. And if you could win those games, I mean, I guess they were 2-1 in the ACC at that point because they'd beaten Georgia Tech also. I say, if you win those games, and this person I was talking to said, Chris, could you, and almost like whispered it because it was like he couldn't believe what he was going to say. He said, Chris, could you imagine if we end up in Charlotte? Because it was a very real possibility. And so I look at that season and I lean toward the success side because, yeah, they had a really bad first half of the season. But after that Notre Dame game, they beat Duke. They went down to Virginia on a Friday night and won that game. They blew out Virginia Tech. one of the biggest blowouts I've seen Pitt administer against a Power 5 opponent or any opponent at Heinz Field. And then they went down to Wake Forest and they had everything on the line. I mean, it was all on the line against Virginia Tech. It was on the line against Virginia. But they go down to Wake Forest and they have the opportunity to clinch the ACC Coastal Division. And people always want to say that when Pitt's got something to play for, they blow it. When they've got a real chance to accomplish something, they blow it. They can never seal the deal. They can never win the big one when it's there in front of them. Well, folks, that was the game right there. That game at Wake Forest was their chance to clinch. Right? They had something to play for. It was all in front of them. They had an opportunity to finally accomplish something. And they did it. They did it. And that, to me, makes me sort of tend toward the success side of the 2018 season, even though there are plenty of markers that would indicate it was a failure or at least a disappointment. When you blow out losses and a bad bowl game and a 7-7 record and losses to bad teams, those are all the hallmarks of a disappointing season. But when you put the Coastal Division Championship and the fact that Pitt went out, they didn't back their way into it. They went out and won it. They went out and legitimately won the Coastal Division. I got to give them credit for that. Let's see. Matt Durney says, with no fans, then all games are neutral site games, essentially, thinking that favors Pitt in the majority of games this year. I don't know. I mean, you go on the road to Boston College. I don't think the fan base never matters there. I've been to a game at Boston College, and I think just one. And that was, I mean, you're not going to be influenced by the fans or by the road crowd, the hostile Chestnut Hill crowd in that one. And same thing at Miami. I mean, for as much as Miami likes to talk about the great program they are, their fans suck. I mean, like, they don't show up for games, even when they're good. And who knows how good Miami's going to be. So you don't worry about that. At Florida State, that's going to be tough. Who knows what Florida is going to be doing? The state of Florida is going to be doing for fans, though. And then at Georgia Tech, again, not exactly a big fan base. I don't think I've watched Pitt lose games down there. 2013. I guess I've only seen Pitt lose once down there. That was in 2013. That was the game when Aaron Donald had like 6 tackles for loss or something like that and played really well, but Pitt still lost. Not a great crowd. The crowd didn't really influence it. And then at Clemson. So, I mean, yeah, you're going to deal with potentially deal with a crowd there if they allow fans back in. I don't look at this much as the home road separation. When I look at games they should win or shouldn't win, I don't think as much about home and road. I mean, Boston College is interesting because they lost to Boston College at home last year. But I'm, going on the road, they should have won last year and they should win this year. So I don't really think too much about the home road distinction. On to Green 19. Chris, in order for Pitt to play in the ACC championship this year, they will have to blank. Win 8 conference games. Win 8 conference games. I think 8 is the number. I thought about it quite a bit. I've said this for a while. I've said this since the ACC rolled out its new 10-game conference schedule. I think you've got to go 8-2 in the conference to give yourself very good odds of making it there. I think if you win 9, you're a lock. If you win 10, you're a lock. I think 8, you might have to win a tiebreaker, but I think it gives you a pretty good chance of getting there. 7, I think you've got a shot, but you're going to have to win a bunch of tiebreakers. 6, you're not getting there at 6. So, Pitt needs to get to the ACC championship game. They got to win 8 games in the conference. Now, if you're asking about what they need to do on the field to win 8 games, they need to score more. And that's not one of those clever, jokes that aren't really all that clever that, the team that scores more points is the one that's going to win. Their offense has to be better. I've been consistent about this all through the summer, all through the spring, back into the winter. If Pitt's going to have success this year, their offense has to step up. And that's why it all comes back to Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett has to be better. And he wasn't the only problem last year on offense. You can make a good case that he wasn't even the biggest problem last year on offense. But he needs to be the biggest strength this year on offense. He needs to elevate the players around him. He needs to make the wide receivers better. He needs to make the tight ends better. He needs to make his offensive line look better. And his running backs. He needs to be the one who elevates the offense. You need to be able to look at it week in and week out and say Kenny Pickett was the best player on the field. That's how they get to 8 wins in the conference. That's how they get to Charlotte for the ACC championship game. Let's see. Durbert asks, will Heinz Field pump in fake crowd noise? I don't know, actually. I don't know what the plan is going to be there. We'll tell you once we get to the stadium on Saturday. I kind of hope not, because I feel like that would be distracting, but maybe it'd be just as weird if it was completely silent. Roman is a long-time podcast viewer. He's always on the live stream. He's been there since the beginning. And Roman, we're glad to have you back. Says, worried about the tackles again this year. Kenny Pickett could be running for his life every play. I hope I'm wrong. Yeah. With the offensive tackles, I'm kind of taking a leap of faith that I take with a lot of the offense, to be honest. I look at Carter Warren and I say, here's a guy who started every game last season at left tackle, and it wasn't always pretty. I think he struggled a lot. And so you come into this year and you say, well, why would you believe that he would be any better in 2020? And I think part of it is that, like I said, he started every game last year. I'm putting a lot of faith in experience for the offensive line. I'm putting a lot of their issues last year on inexperience, whether it's Carter Warren and Bryce Hargrove as first-year starters on the left side, or Jake Cradle and Gabe Hoy as first-year starters on the right side, with Nolan Alizio, who wasn't very good as a graduate transfer. None of those guys were very experienced. None of those guys had a lot of playing time under their belt, a lot of snaps under the belt. And I think that's important, particularly in the offensive line. This year, Warren and Hargrove have played every game together. You know what I mean? They've played 13 games next to each other on the left side. Cradle and Hoy played a lot last year. They're experienced guys now. Carson Van Lin has played a fair amount. I have to think that counts for something. I have to think that leads to an improvement up front. I think you feel pretty good about the interior of the offensive line. I think Jimmy Morrissey is as solid as it gets. I think Bryce Hargrove will be good in his, as a fifth-year senior, his second year as a starter. I think Jake Cradle makes a big jump from his redshirt freshman to redshirt sophomore year. like Roman said, you got to get the tackles figured out. And I'm willing to put faith in Carter Warren getting better after being a starter for a year. Not every second-year starter is a good player. Some of those guys never get any better. They are who they were as they're in their first year as a starter. It seems like there's a belief that Carter Warren can take a step forward. And then the right tackle, they need Gabe Hoy or Keldrick Wilson, whoever steps in there, to also take a step forward. I mean, I think you're right, Roman, that there's cause for concern about the offensive tackles. But if you're looking for reasons for optimism, I think you look at the experience factor and hope that counts for something or a lot. Ricky the Dragon Kayak, 9-2. Chris, you've been hitting the devil's lettuce. Sir, I resent the implication. No, it's like I said, yeah, I mean 9-2 is a crazy record. I'm mostly focused on what they do in 10 games. And Eric Rogers, who's as big a Pitt fan as you're going to find, he says, hate to be a Debbie Downer, but I just don't see Pitt winning that many games, 6 or 7 wins. And, Ricky replied, 7-4, Eric. I know Pitt too well to be more optimistic than that. All right, so, I mean, could I see Pitt going 6-4 in the ACC? Absolutely. I could see them winning those 4 games we talked about, needing to win, losing Clemson and Notre Dame, and then splitting the Louisville, Virginia Tech, Miami, and Florida State games and going 2-2 in those. And that's a 6-4 record right there. If you don't get an upset win against Clemson or Notre Dame, that's 6-4, which is your 7-4 record. It's absolutely realistic. I could totally see that happening. I just think that it's okay to put those expectations on them, to do a little more than that, to win 8 games in the ACC, to go out and be consistently, week to week, a good team. I think that's fair. Again, in year 6, where you don't have a lot of depth holes, you don't have a lot of holes you have to fill. You obviously have a hole at cornerback with Damari Mathis getting hurt, but you've got really good players all over that defense. And you've got an offense that I think has something to prove. You've got an offense that I think has a good leader at quarterback and has enough pieces in place that they should be able to come out and play at a higher level than they did last year. And if they play at a higher, if the offense is a little bit better last year, they probably win. They could win 8 games in the regular season, potentially 9. If the offense is a little bit better last year, they beat Miami and Boston College. And there you go. You go from 7-5 to 9-3. And the offense only would have had to get just a little bit better to pull that off. I'm saying that I think it's reasonable and acceptable to expect this offense to get a little bit better this year and win more of those games. Not give up the Boston College and Miami game. Or whatever the equivalent will be this year. I guess the equivalent this year, it might be Boston College and NC State or, Georgia Tech or something like that. Syracuse and NC State. If we're talking about 2 home games that you really can't afford to lose. You really shouldn't lose, like the Miami and Boston College games last year. I don't know. I'm just kind of ready to put that pressure on this team. I mean, not like they're listening to me and be like, oh, crap, Chris, we need to go 9-2. We better do it. No, I'm not putting that pressure on them. I think they should feel that pressure, though. I think at this point, with the players they have, they should feel the pressure to win 9 games. And is it realistic? Yeah, I think they're talented enough to do that. Is it going to happen? It's hard for me to guarantee it. If you told me I had to bet my house on something, I'm probably betting more on like 7-4. But I think this team needs to go out and do better than that. Let's see. William Schroeder asks, Narduzzi needs 6 wins this season to match Wanstead after his 6 seasons. If he only gets 6, is there any chance Pitt would move on from him as well, or is there a different feeling? I mean, if Pitt goes 6-5 this season, I don't think they're going to fire anybody. I think this is a pretty fireproof year, given all the extreme circumstances. I think if Narduzzi is able to shepherd this team through the pandemic, keep them together, not have huge breakouts and that kind of thing, I highly doubt he would get fired, even if he went 6-5. I mean, it would have to be a pretty extreme embarrassment on and off the field, which Dave Wanstead had going for him, in order to get fired. I just don't see that happening. Nicholas Timperio, he's predicting Pitt going 8-3. Kenny Pickett making the third team All ACC. Yeah, I think you're going to need Pickett to play at an All ACC level, third team, second team, first team, whatever it is, in order to get to the win totals we're talking about. Now 8-3. See, 8-3 is an interesting record to me. 8-3 overall means you went 7-3 in the ACC. We assume Clemson and Notre Dame is two of those losses. If your other loss is maybe Louisville or Virginia Tech, or maybe one of the road games against one of the teams in Florida, I don't know. What do you think about that? It wouldn't be terrible. Probably feel like something was left, left undone. You know what I mean? That there was more they could have accomplished that they fell short of. I think that would probably be the general feeling. But I don't think that would be a terrible season. Probably a little bit coming up short. Probably underachieving a little bit to go 7-3. Just with the talent they have. But that wouldn't be, I guess it would depend on how some of those losses are, And, it would depend if you lose to Louisville or you lose to Virginia Tech or one of the Florida teams, did you get blowed out? Did you get blown out or were you competitive, And what if you end up swapping out? Like maybe you beat Notre Dame but lose to Miami and Florida State. Do you feel better about that? I don't know. There's so much context that goes with these things. It's tough to say exactly. But, I mean, I don't know. I don't think 8-3, if Pickett plays at an all-conference level, I don't think that's a terrible outcome for this season. Brock Madonic follows up and says, really excited to see what Trey Tipton can do. If he can stay healthy, he will definitely help. Yeah, we don't really talk about Tipton much. I mean, we talk so much about Jordan Addison. We talk about Taysier Mack and Shockey Jacques Louis. And certainly all the freshmen in addition to Addison, Jalen Barden, and Aiden Henningham. But we don't talk about Trey Tipton much. 6th-year senior, finally coming back for what should be his final year at Pitt, you would think, although you get a free year, so maybe he'll come back. Coming back, and maybe he'll get another one. But, yeah, I've actually heard some good things about Trey Tipton and the camp he's having. If he can stay healthy, I think he can make an impact. It's going to be interesting to see what this wide receiver rotation looks like because I talked last week about how I'm kind of bullish on the wide receivers, how I think these guys can actually be kind of good. And I think Tipton can be a part of that. It'll just be interesting to see how they rotate all these different guys in with Taysier Mack, Shockey Jacques Louis, Trey Tipton, Jared Wayne, Jordan Addison. You bring in DJ Turner as the transfer. They got a lot of guys they can roll out there with different skill sets. It's going to be very interesting to see how they deploy them and who ends up really contributing. Colin Towell says, what freshman will get some playing time this year on defense? Solomon DeShields, Deion Hayes, Rashad Battle, Javonte Royal. Those are all good options. I would lean toward the cornerbacks first, Javonte Royal and Rashad Battle. I think those guys are going to get some playing time out there at corner, particularly after Damari Mathis got hurt. I could see Solomon DeShields and Bengali Kamara, the two linebackers, getting time at least on special teams. And really with the depth with the depth questions at outside linebacker, I could see DeShields and Kamara playing there as well, maybe getting some snaps on defense. Those guys have really impressed this season. I think Deion Hayes from Westinghouse is going to be really good. They just are so deep at defensive end, I don't know if they're actually going to need him this year. They might get him some snaps because you have a free year and he can redshirt and all of that, but I don't know if I see him getting on the field too much this year. Let's see. Matt Durney, why so automatic to say Pitt loses to Notre Dame, thinking it's more likely to beat Notre Dame and then drop one to Miami or Florida State or both? Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong, Matt. Like I said, I mean, Pitt has played Notre Dame close. A lot over the years. 2018, they went out to Notre Dame and, out in South Bend, Notre Dame was in the top 5 and they only, it was 19-14 game. It was really close. Before that, they played in 2015. Narduzzi's first year, not a great year. It ended up being 42-30, although it wasn't a total blowout, but Notre Dame was pretty much in control. 2013, Pitt beat Notre Dame. That was the game here. 2012 was the game at Notre Dame that went to double overtime, triple overtime. Real close one there. Todd Graham lost to Notre Dame 15-12 in 2011. pretty bad game in 2010, but it was still a 23-17 loss in South Bend. Even when they lose, they generally keep it close. Outside of really that 2005 game in Dave Wanstead's debut, the first game of the season, 42-21 loss. They've generally kept it close. They give Notre Dame a battle. I'm not saying it's automatic that Pitt will lose to Notre Dame. I'm just saying Notre Dame seems that, I think we can generally assume that Notre Dame has superior talent and they're a better team than Pitt, and so it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a game that Pitt is probably not favored to win. Ricky the Dragon Kayak says 8-3 would be a great year in my opinion. Pitt would probably finish 4th. I'd sign up for that. Yeah, I think so too, but I think we would probably be left with a feeling of underachieving. So probably be a little bit of both. Royce Beacom says, I think we're agreeing that 7 wins is the over-under. That would be with the suspect running game, but with no obvious holes that could appear with a few key injuries. Yeah, 7 wins. If we're going to set it on the half line, 6.5, I guess. Would you bet over on 6.5? Because over on 6.5 means they have to get 7, which means they need to go 6-4. Yeah, I would bet over on 6.5. What about 7.5? Did you bet over on 7.5? You bet over on 7.5. That means they need to win 8 total, which means they need to go 7-3 in the ACC, which would be probably just over the line. If you were going to split the line between a good season and a disappointing or mediocre season, that would be the line, right, between 6 and 7. Where 6 is kind of a disappointing season, you go 6-4 in the ACC. 7-3 would be, I think you would have to call that a good season in the ACC. Not a great season, not a conference winning season, but a good season to go 7-3. Would you bet the over on that if it was 7.5? I don't know. I don't think Vegas will set that. I think Vegas will set it at 6.5 or even 5.5. I think it was because Ricky the Dragon points out that it was 6.5. Before it was 6.5 when they were talking about playing a 12-game regular season. So you cut it down to 11 games. Are they going to take the over/under down to 5.5? Probably not, because the game you lost would have probably been a win anyway. So, or maybe that will cause them to drop it to 5.5. I don't know. I would definitely bet the over on 5.5. I would probably bet the over on 6.5. 7.5 is where it should be. I think most of the money would come in on the under. There might be a nice little opportunity to pay off there on the over. I don't know. I just can't. I can't believe we're actually here, folks. I'm genuinely surprised. We're less than 4 days. 3 days and hours away from the start of the 2020 season. It's Saturday afternoon, 4 p.m. You can listen to the game, of course, on the Fan if you don't have the ACC network. I imagine most people get the ACC network now that the season's about to start. If you want to listen to it on the radio, you can listen to it on the Fan. Jeff Hathorn's going to be calling the game. Pre-game show will start a couple hours before the game itself, which kicks off at 4 p.m. Of course, Saturday morning we'll have the Panthers Insider Show, so that really gets your day started at 8 a.m. on 93.7 The Fan. That's me doing a little hour of Pitt sports talk, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. on Saturday morning. So tune in for that. And then come back to the Fan in the early afternoon to get set for Pitt against Austin Peay. Of course, stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com all week long to get ready for the game. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It is the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet: football, basketball, recruiting. You find it all at Panther-Lair.com. And of course, we have message boards which a season like this where you're not going to be able to go to any of the games. Go on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. We'll have a game thread running. You can talk about the game with other Pitt fans as it's happening. So, what's better than that? You want to go to the game, you want to watch the game and hang out with people and watch the game, and I understand that. But if you can't do that, get on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. And you can interact there and talk with other Pitt fans there. Don't forget about our friends at Home Field Apparel. They make great Pitt shirts. They've sort of crowdsourced Pitt shirt ideas of what kind of designs Pitt fans would like to see on the shirts. It's really, really organically made in that regard. They've got some great Pitt designs at homefieldapparel.com. You can go look at their Pitt selection. or Pitt collection is what I should say. And the shirts are really high quality too. Super soft, super comfortable, and just great designs. I mean, I think if you're a Pitt fan, you're looking for some new Pitt gear to get ready for the season, go check out homefieldapparel.com. That's the best place to find their gear, and it's a great place to buy some sweet Pitt shirts. So did I cover everything? Stay tuned to the website, Panther-Lair.com. Go check out Homefield shirts at homefieldapparel.com. Follow me on Twitter at Panther-Lair, Pantherlair. Don't forget to subscribe to Panther-Lair on YouTube. You're watching this live stream on YouTube right now, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Like the video, and that's cool. We like it when you like it. But also make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel so you know when we go live to talk about Pitt sports. We'll go live throughout this season. We'll have lots of live streams. Get on there and subscribe, and then you get a notification. You get to know when we're getting started, and we're trying to bump those numbers up. We want to get those subscription numbers up on YouTube to really make something out of this. So youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. If you're on the live stream tonight on Tuesday night, subscribe to Panther-Lair on YouTube. And if you're listening to the podcast later in the week, go to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com and click to subscribe there. We really appreciate that. So tune in, of course, every Tuesday night at 8:30 for the live stream. We got the Saturday 8 a.m. Saturday morning Panthers Insider Show on 93.7 The Fan. Got a lot of stuff going on. We got to keep straight in the old duder's head. But thanks so much for tuning in. As always, we appreciate it. Thanks for coming into the live stream, having a good conversation to get ready for this season. We're counting down the days, folks. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back next Tuesday night at 8:30 to break down the Austin Peay game. We might even talk to you sooner than that because we got a little drive home, right? We can always have a drive home podcast. So make sure you check that out. Stay tuned to the podcast. Stay tuned to the website. Stay tuned to the live stream. Enjoy the rest of the week, and we'll talk to you on Saturday, folks. Have a good one.